Hello again, my friends, and welcome to the show. I'm Ryan Campbell, your host. I'm here with Heather Bernikoff. You are a board member for the Sierra Nevada Conservancy. I've got a lot of interesting questions for you. But first off, can you tell me a little bit about what the Sierra Nevada Conservancy is and kind of how long you've been with it and what its role is in the community?
Sure. Well, Ryan, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for being interested in the Sierra Nevada Conservancy and for having me on. I'm just kind of a one of the newer members on the board. I was appointed by Governor Gavin Newsom back in 2021.
Yeah.
So, as far as some of the other people have been on there much longer than I have, but I really appreciate your interest in sharing.
Of course, of course. And thank you for being here.
Yeah, well, the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, as maybe some people know, maybe some people don't know, it's actually a state agency. It's under the Department of Conservation. Wade Crowfoot is the deputy there, and it focuses on
And who's
watershed.
Wade Crowfoot?
Oh, well, he's the deputy of the Department of Conservation. Um, that department in the state of California.
Yeah,
One of the many.
somebody that's well known around our community for a lot of different activities. So
Oh, is that right?
yeah, yeah.
That's awesome.
I don't know. No, I've heard of him.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I mean, he's
Yeah,
been a really successful leader for
yeah.
that department, from my what I understand, and I don't know his title exactly, so hopefully that's I mean, but he's in charge basically.
Yeah.
But the Sierra Nevada Conservancy is, again, a state agency, and it was founded in 2004. And I don't know if you remember, but we had a big bond measure that focused on water. And it was that bond measure that provided the funds from the voters of the state of California in order to create this department that would really focus on watershed improvement, would focus on, and eventually it would morph into many other things that were really near term critical issues like wildland stewardship and fuels reduction, those kinds of things.
Yeah. So what got you involved in that, and why are you interested in stewardship and watershed preservation? Are you focused more on the wildland element of it? Are you actually looking at, preserving different species of animals? What is the mission and the goals of the Sierra Nevada Conservancy?
Yeah, and I'm sorry to everybody who's going to watch this from the Sierra Nevada Conservancy. I don't have the mission actually memorized, but essentially, it's a grant making organization. Again, a department in the state of
Okay.
California, grant making organization that focuses on all the different stewardship kinds of um, investments like wildland conservation, um, the watershed improvement, and resiliency for communities. They actually have a number of different goals that they focus on with the dollars that come to them through these bond measures. So, for example, in here in Tuolumne County, there have been 13 investments, about, I think a little bit over 5 million, $6 million of investments, and some of them are planning grants that actually help to, like, for rim fire
Mhm.
restoration and recovery. Um, there was a gray owl project that was planned and actually implemented. So a lot of the investments that have been made that here in Tuolumne County that focused on building the planning, because as you can imagine, these projects are extremely complex and some
Mhm.
of them are very big. They're dealing with hundreds of acres, sometimes even thousands of acres, and special species. Also, fuels reductions, watershed protection. So again, lots of moving parts with these
Yeah.
projects. So it's really important that there be a planning process. The department actually has staff that's located in the regions that they serve. So there's actually a staff person for this region, which would be considered the South Central region here in Tuolumne County. Mariposa is a part of that, which is where I live,
Mhm.
and the staff person for SNC lives in Mariposa, but obviously works and stewards projects up here.
Mhm.
So really, it's a concierge operation. That's how I look at it.
Okay.
I've in my professional career, my background and training is in public health, but also I've been recruited into the philanthropy arena. So I've worked in philanthropy as well as healthcare, and so because this is a grant making organization, I understand grant making really well, and so I always consider it a concierge operation. I can't tell you how professional and how talented the staff is. I mean, it's unbelievable. And these folks that are on the ground, they are mission driven and they are there to help organizations that are looking to make a big difference in, again, wildfire protection, water quality and availability, all these things that we need as human beings to survive and to thrive in the Sierra Cascade region.
Mhm. Yeah, and you mentioned the rim fire, and I know that's a pretty high profile project that Sierra Nevada Conservancy has been involved in. What is how does that work? I mean, rim fire was this historic fire, destroyed thousands of acres in 2013. We're just past the 10-year anniversary of it. How do you restore? Why is it important to restore those lands, and what does that entail? Are you just planting trees? Is there more to it than that? And why is that important for watersheds?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I think a lot of people actually, wonder about that. But when you're working on the ground, just think about it as a person, right? You have a blackened landscape.
Yeah,
And we have to remember too that we are in an era of catastrophic fires. These are not the normal fires. So, like my cousins, the Southern Sierra Miwok and the Central Sierra Miwok, who are here in Mariposa and Tuolumne County, they've had fires, they've had cultural burns for their entire life, their entire existence on this land. And so, fire is important to the land, but it has to be the right intensity and right timing of fire. And so what we're having now are catastrophic fires, and that means the singed trees that would have normally survived it. It means that they actually can sterilize soil. I mean, these are really grim, terrible things to happen to an ecosystem because, again, fire is natural and normal in a lower intensity. And gives things an opportunity to exist. There are certain seeds actually that can only be germinated because fire runs over them. So these are really important things. So you ask about restoration. So restoration work can take a look at, make an assessment of what's happening, what's happened on the ground, and try and help restore that ecosystem to where it was, and actually healthier than what it was. Because a lot of times, we have forests that are overgrown.
right.
Um,
Which is why the fires happened in the first place.
in a catastrophic way, where they
Yeah.
burn really hot and really fast. And so, when you have overgrowth in forests, for example, you can be taking more soil moisture out of the soil. And when you have a drier soil, that actually helps to increase fire danger and fire intensity. Um, you know, Back in the day, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not a forester, but these are things that I've learned, and of course, myself, just having when going to Humboldt State University, which is my alma mater.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a really big forestry program, and so, of course, I've had classes in stewardship and things like that when I went to that university.
Mhm.
So I pick up things here and there, but I've gotten such a great education about just how these projects work, how intense and how complex they can be. So when you're asking about like restoration work, it's not just about like planting new trees. It's about stabilizing banks because, again, when fires come through catastrophically, sometimes they'll just take out all the trees, when they're and their
When
roots
you
are
say
holding.
stabilizing bank, what kind of banks?
Yeah, the banks of
River banks?
rivers,
Okay.
creeks, things like that. Because remember, these waters are all watering us, right?
Yeah.
We depend on a very complex filtration system between roots and the roots holding the sediment back. When you look at water quality, if you, I'm sure TUD here has a uh, periodical that they send out to their customers, and it talks about the water quality. I believe that's a requirement. So turbidity is an example of one of those things, where it's in the extent to which there's a lot of dirt in the water, right?
Mhm.
We want our water clean. There's other constituent contaminants that can happen when you're starting to erode banks and then have that infiltrate the water.
Mm.
Remember, this is also a community county where there was a lot of mining done. And when you pulverize rock and those kinds of things, like slate, for example, you can have arsenic as a result of that.
Mm.
Um, you know, uh,
Do you see that a lot I mean, I know a lot of the studies originate with Sierra Nevada Conservancy. You kind of fund those studies, right? Is that sort of the role?
I
Or
think, what we do is we provide financial capacity,
yeah,
and we also provide technical assistance to organizations on the ground that are doing the work.
okay.
Because as SNC is a responsive organization. We want to respond to the needs that the community is telling us about because it's always different.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about mining and studies, that's just from my own personal information, my own personal knowledge. Again, my background and training is in public health, and one of the areas that I love the most in the work that I do or have done in the past is that intersection between human health and environmental health. And so when we're talking about like water quality, air quality, emissions from vehicles or stationary things. So that's kind of my love
Yeah.
language, the things that I'm really excited about. But as far as the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, they really are focusing a lot on fuels reductions, conservation,
Yeah.
water quality, watershed protection, and um, and then also fuels reduction.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, you brought it up, it's about air quality. So I'll kind of share this perspective that I've heard many times in various sectors throughout our county, is that if you look at the 80s and 90s, there was an overwhelming focus on air quality and air quality improvement. You look at, I don't know if you were ever in Los Angeles in the 80s or 90s, but the air was terrible.
Oh, it's horrible.
Yeah, you could cut it with a knife and fork pretty much.
Yeah.
And so there was all this effort to reduce smog, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, all those types of things, CFCs, that stuff. And so the way it was kind of interpreted in some of the forest land is that we want to put out every single fire as quickly as we possibly could, because it would impact air quality. Now, one of the things that I've been trying to push for is increasing prescribed burning, and the fact that that actually historically has a role
Mhm.
in our communities and in our forests. Uh, but there's still a lot of pushback on that, at least at the state level, because when you do prescribed burning, you are releasing particulate matter into the air. But if you look at the long term consequences, I mean, do you feel that that balances out? That if if we don't treat the land, it's going to all burn anyway, and you're going to release a lot of carbon and particulate matter when that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always a delicate balance, right?
Yeah.
Because when we're in communities, especially our communities now that have been ravaged by catastrophic wildfire, and I mean, wow, weeks of disgusting air where we're breathing in and we're having to shelter in place and have air purifiers going if you're lucky enough to have one. Um, it's it is a balance, and if you probably ask some of the tribal communities that work in fire, they would say there needs to be more good fire on the land.
Mhm.
And
Because historically in our area, it was the tribes that would manage the land with
no
fire.
question, no question. When John Muir came to Yosemite National Park, what's now Yosemite National Park, there's a reason why it was so gorgeous.
Mm.
There was a reason why it inspired him to write and to work on the national park system. It was because there were human beings there. There were Miwok people there, Paiute people there, that were managing that land for their own sustenance, for their own needs, and not taking more than they should.
Mhm.
Not promoting like acorn harvests and things like that,
Yeah,
so that they could have abundance for food for their families and their people.
yeah. And you mentioned you live in Mariposa now, but you
Yeah.
were originally a Groveland gal, right?
I was, yeah. I grew up in Groveland.
Yeah,
I'm a graduate of Tenaya Elementary, class of 1984.
awesome. And you didn't have to give the date, so
That's all right. You know what? It's a new time. I'm not
I
worried
know.
about ages
Yeah, it's
anymore
fine.
and stuff.
And so, but part of your background is you have an indigenous background. Does that inform in any way some of the decisions or the way you look at land management and stewardship?
No question. Absolutely no question. I mean, from the time I was a child, we lived pretty rurally on the edge of the Stanislaus National Forest in Groveland, and we were just kind of the only kids in our area. So there were four of us, and so we made up our own games, and we were in the forest all day. We had a beautiful swimming hole in a creek that was right near the house, and just it would be us and our dog. Just kind of pack a sandwich and a loaded bag of water, and we'd be off. So yeah, absolutely. My mother, I come from a mixed race household. My mother is the one who's indigenous and Latina, and my father is like European descent. But it was my mother. My dad was working a lot, so it was my mother's values, I think, that informed, for me at least, um, how, my view of the world. And so some of the things that we were taught was, stewardship, was not thinking that we were more important than all these other things. Yeah, that all these, like a tree, a rock, the deer, the ladybugs, those are our relatives.
Mhm.
And because they have a right to live and to thrive and have families similar to human beings. I mean, those are the values that I was raised with. We were really, I mean, just never litter. We will always clean things up. And in fact, my mother was actually a Girl Scout leader. So she
Oh,
was
wow.
a brownie leader. She was our little,
And you were in Girl Scouts too, I guess?
I
Oh,
was, I
okay.
was. Yeah, I was a little brownie with my little brown beanie and outfit and stuff like that. And then went to the juniors and worked on badges and those kinds of things. But, I always feel like, there's, even though there's a dominant culture, uh, infusion that we have, because we have to live in this modern world, there are still threads of values that come through, even though I come from a community that there's been an attempt to erase us. Whether it be our language, our customs, our songs, our rituals, belief systems. Definitely a concerted effort by the U.S. government over years and years and years to erase Indigenous people and just create a new space here, on land that we have inhabited for tens of thousands of years.
Mhm.
So even with that, I feel as though the Native people that I know, there's always been a thread, that remains. And if not a full, if some people are very fortunate that they have grandparents and great grandparents that they knew that retained songs, traditions, cultures, arts, crafts, basket making, jewelry making, medicine making from the plants around us. Some people were really, really fortunate that they got to have their language and culture. I think a lot of indigenous people, there's didn't, because the genocide attempt in this country.
Mhm.
Um, and so I see a resurgence now. This next generation is like some of the most amazing young people, indigenous young people. They are just like unapologetically reclaiming their languages, their songs, their ways, how to make medicine. In fact, in a couple weeks, there's an indigenous like 3-day workshop to bring our various Native peoples back to learn uh, traditional things. And so I'm actually one of the teachers. I was honored to be asked to teach about native plants and pollinators as our relatives, because I do a lot of that work just on my own. And so I just see that resurgence. And so full circle, Ryan, it's probably the longest answer to your very
Yeah.
short question, but those values are really important in the work that we do. Um, I think it should be it should be part of the lens that we look at no matter where we're at, because the hegemonistic uh, way in which the dominant culture has existed on this planet, of taking more
Mhm.
than what they need, than what the earth can handle. We're seeing that with water. We have these droughts that come, and we have water overdraft from the Central Valley, and the
Yeah.
subsidence in the land, and
And
so
that's what's so interesting to me is that if you look at the numbers, we have enough water to meet all the needs of the state. It's just the way we manage it is
yeah,
the problem.
absolutely, and how much some people take a lot.
Yeah.
Right? And then I'm over here living with, like, I have rainwater catchment systems.
Hmm.
I'm a huge miser when it comes to water.
Yeah.
I'm lucky I do clean my clothes for you today, Ryan. So, and so at least I could,
Yeah.
represent well. But yeah, I mean, my poor husband, I'm always like, did you bring the bucket in, and
Yeah.
to use rainwater to flush the toilets or shower water,
Right.
when it's warming up. It's just really important to me because I guess, growing up in Groveland and certainly Tuolumne County, it's us mountain folks that are asked to pay the price. While we watched one of the big droughts. I don't know if you remember when you were younger, but there would be these newscasts, and they would show all the LA people um, or most of the city people like hosing off their driveways,
Right.
and it's a drought, and here we are taking sponge baths.
Mhm.
I remember seeing that. I think, well, I don't even know. I think it was in the 90s,
Mhm.
and we were just so angry. I know a lot of people were angry when we
Right.
saw those images and all those green grass, with the overspray of the water and it running down in the gutter. And here we are again. Can't flush a toilet more. Except
Yeah.
except in certain circumstances.
I
And
remember with the last drought that we had up here, it was the almond fields. People would leave Tuolumne County, they'd go drive down Highway 12 or uh, Jacktone Road, and they'd see these almond orchards that were just completely flooded with water. And you just think about the gallons and gallons of water just evaporating off the surface of that water for what is a fairly inefficient uh, agricultural practice.
yeah, there's always different ways of looking at things. Of course, everybody has their sides and what have you. And certainly, for groundwater absorption, having that kind of flooding of fields is helpful. But of course, you have to look at it
Mm,
from a math standpoint, right? You're still taking out to flood back in,
mhm,
and so there's always going to be a net loss. And the same is, with drip systems. You have your now really precise in your allocation of water to each plant, each tree. But then how is the math working out on that for how much we're taking out, how much is evaporating, and how much is getting into that food that we're raising? And then the question is, well, is the food for this region, is the food for our local communities, or are we basically exporting our water out to the planet, to overseas, to China, to Turkey, to India, to wherever, in the form of, tomatoes
right.
or almonds or nuts or what have you.
Yeah. What are some projects that are coming up that people might keep their eyes open for in the local community? I know there's something called a watershed improvement plan, the WIP. Is
Oh,
that
the WIP Summit, yeah, the Watershed
what is
Improvement
what is that?
Program. So back to Sierra Nevada Conservancy. I think it's around in the March. It's every spring. We have 4 board meetings a year, and then aligned with our spring board meeting is this WIP Summit, and um, and it's essentially an opportunity to. It happens in Sacramento, and it's an opportunity for rule makers, decision makers, legislators to come and see the projects, and the projects are showcased. There's a number of projects that are showcased during that summit, and to just see our taxpayer dollars in action.
Hmm.
It's I mean I went last year, and it's really outstanding. Just the amount of projects that get done by the Sierra Nevada Conservancy staff and the time that it takes. It seems like it's a long time, but I got to tell you, the complexity of the projects, they can actually move some things pretty quickly.
Mhm.
And then just the outcomes of the projects are outstanding. And again, we talked about it's not just stewardship, it's land conservation, or what it's not just uh, fuels reduction for wildfire safety or prevention, but it's resilient communities. We've Sierra Nevada Conservancy has made investments in mills. So, like
Mm,
for example, in Taylorsville, there's a mill that's using the burn trees and the bug kill trees
mhm.
to make lumber to rebuild the town of Greenville that burned down in one of the
Yeah,
most recent catastrophic fires. So, I mean, there's all kinds of other things that the conservancy invests in, trail systems. Again, and I know our executive director always talks about the triple bottom line. So it's about environment, economy, and the social good.
yeah. Well, and I wanted to ask you about that because kind of the traditional view is you've got, industry and development and timber industry development on one side, and then you've got environmental interests on the other side, and they kind of don't jive very well. That kind of goes back to the '90s where there's the spotted owl and sort of the degradation of what was the timber industry at that time. Uh, what How has that changed? Because how do you balance the interests of the need for housing? We don't have enough adequate housing in Tuolumne County. The need for people to have well-paying jobs, just basically the need for industry and development that is
Yeah.
there. How do you balance that with the need to preserve the natural world and make sure that we're being responsible stewards
Mhm.
of the land?
I think that's an age-old question, and I certainly don't have all the answers, right? but I can say that that it takes all of us.
Mhm.
And as soon as we come from our entrenched positions
Yeah.
to with humility and with the intent to work for equitable solutions, then magic happens. I got to tell you, at Sierra Nevada Conservancy, you see that magic happening. You see those interests coming together to say, "Yeah, I can do this. I can take a haircut on this in order to achieve that." And that's all sides coming together to do that because we know we have to have places to live. We know we have to have lumber to be able to build these things, but to what extent and to what scale? Everything is always about scale. You know, how much forest do you take down in order to build this or to build that? How many jobs are part of that, are part of those program creation stories, if you will. Um, when people come together with that intent to be successful in an endeavor, I think anything's possible. If you just leave the leave that, the acrimony from previous history, um, and also like that madness for profit, you know, is $1 billion enough? Do you have to make 7 billion when you can make 1 billion and live very comfortably and yet provide good paying jobs for people? Create a mill that maybe doesn't do the highest volume, but can sustain itself by selling lumber to distressed, homeowners that had their homes burned down at a reasonable price. I mean, I think that these are all decisions we have to make um, as leaders or as people who have that privilege of owning or have that capital to invest, to own a business or have that capital to invest. What will we accept as success? And is something enough, or do you have to have everything?
Yeah. Well, Heather, thank you so much. It's been really fascinating talking to you and getting kind of a picture into the the organizational side of some of these projects that are we all know about in Tuolumne County, but we don't necessarily know where they originate from. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
come back anytime. So Heather Bernikoff, you are the one of the board members of the Sierra Nevada Conservancy. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you for joining us. I'm Ryan Campbell. Please join me again next week. We'll be talking about Tuolumne County with more interesting conversations. Have a good day.